Hello, in this tutorial you're going to learn about graded washes in both wet in wet techniques and also wet and dry techniques, and we will create this simple but effective rolling hills painting just using those two different techniques. Happy painting. So to start, we're just going to wet the paper with clean water. I use a flat brush for this. You can use a mop brush as well if you like. I use a flat brush just because I can control the amount of water I put on, so I don't have to mop any up later. A mop brush can hold a lot more water than a flat, so sometimes you can put a bit too much down. But it's down to preference really first and foremost. Using a nice thick mix of Prussian Blue, I'm just going to start at the top of the page and slowly bring the paint down from top to bottom. And as you see, as you go down, the paint on the brush becomes less, therefore creating a thinner value towards the bottom. If you feel that you want to darken it up a bit more, just then go back to the top of your Prussian Blue and then slowly do the same thing over the top of what you've just started doing. As you can see, it looks like there's lots of stripes on the page right now, but eventually when this dries, the paint will disperse and blend nicely. Here, I just thought that the bottom of the gradient was a bit too dark for my liking, so using a clean brush, just start along the bottom and slowly taking the brush upwards. That will lift some of the paint off. I then added some more Prussian Blue to the top, just to create a bit more of a darker sky. When doing this gradient effect type wash, make sure you go right the way across to give you an even coat of paint. If you stop halfway then start again from the centre, then you'll end up with uneven gradients. Now that we've painted our first gradient wash, we need to let that just dry for a moment. Make sure that it's completely dry before you do anything else to the painting. This could take a few minutes, it depends how much water you got on your paper. It could take 15 minutes, it could take 30 minutes. Just be patient. It's a good way to learn to be patient and relax with your paintings. Very often when we start painting and we're new to painting with watercolours, we want to rush and create a masterpiece and have something to see straight away, but we need to just learn, take a step back, let the painting dry before we carry on with the next step. While you're waiting for it to dry, you can just think about your next steps with the painting, thinking, is this the best way to go about it? What can I do different? How can I make this better? Just those things. So use that time while you're waiting to be productive in thought. As you can see, as time passes by, the gradient tends to blend all those brush strokes that were created as we went down the paper. I cut this part of the video just a bit shorter because it would be like watching paint dry. Just put your hand on just to see if it's still damp or whether it's completely dry before you make your next painting brush strokes. What we're doing now is creating mountains or hills, whatever you'd like to call them, in the distance, just by simply using a thick mix of Prussian Blue again, and just gently stroking wavy strokes across the page. And again, this is a wet on dry, so you don't need to wet the paper for this. So this is how we do a gradient using just the wet on dry technique. And as you can see, as the brush goes down, less paint is on the brush and it becomes thinner, creating a lighter gradient towards the bottom. I think here I just added a bit of water to my brush just to soften the edge there. Now once it's completely dry, again another time that you need to wait for it to dry, you can then add your next layer, or rolling hill as you'd like to call it, using a thick mix of Prussian Blue again, repeating the same wet on dry technique. Slowly bring the brush down the page, and it gets lighter the further down you go. Again, when the last layer is completely dry, you can then do the next layer of wet on dry technique, repeating the same process that we've done for the last two layers. That's what we need to remember with watercolours: you're painting in layers, and always remember to go from light to dark. As the hills of the foreground are closer, they tend to be a deeper mix of whatever colours that you're using, and in this case Prussian Blue. Now we're just adding one more layer for the hills in the closest foreground, I think that's what you call it. Again, same technique, but obviously the gradient isn't going to be as noticeable on this one because there's less space to carry out that technique. And when you're happy with it, you can call it a day, and then it's done. This tutorial is a simple tutorial that anybody can do really. It's basically laying the foundations for watercolour painting in general. So what you'll find is if you're painting a petal on a leaf, you can use the graded wash technique on small areas, or you can do complete sky washes on large areas too. Now all that's left to do is remove the tape. When removing the tape, put it at a 90-degree angle slowly, as we don't want to rip the paper. What I've found as well over time, if you leave the tape on too long, it can bond stronger with the paper, and then you'll have more chance of tearing the paper underneath as you peel it. But just take your time, be gentle and be steady. If you do tear a bit of the white paper around the edge, that's fine. It's probably going to go in a frame anyway, so that part will be hidden. Okay, so what you can see here is where the tape was and where we painted, there's a slight bleed around the edge. This is partly to do with the texture of the paper. As I'm using rough paper, there's lots of textured dents in the paper, so obviously the paint's going to run underneath. Don't worry about that too much, that's fine, because once it's mounted and framed, that will all be covered up anyway.